They lost, Bum Phillips' son. I'm blanking on his name. But they, and they lost members of the secondary, Weddle, Roby Coleman. There's tons of things with them where they were already starting to teeter last year, and they got, they still only got to 9 wins, despite, I think, some lucky circumstance with them. And then to Evan's point, Sean McVay, had one of the best up-and-coming offensive schemes in the NFL. The Patriots ran quarters on them in the Super Bowl, and he had no answer to beat quarters. And then the entire season a year ago, they still could not beat basically even coverages at all. And, Jared Goff, having bought into him when he's kind of a quarterback who needs the coach to do all his thinking for him, to me, there's so much hinging on how good Sean McVay can be to adapt to the league. And historically speaking, you see it with Chip Kelly, you see it with a lot of great minds. Sometimes they're just one-trick ponies, and when the league figures them out, they're left basically average or worst after that.
Yeah, I think they have a chance to be pretty bad. Let's go to another team in that division, San Francisco 49ers, 10.5, minus 110 on both. It's just kind of, for me, I'm typically going to want to fade teams who need 11 wins when a lot of their equity is tied up in defensive play, and defensive stats are, Eric can speak more to it, but so much of defensive stuff is not sticky year to year. It's just not. Turnovers are so hard to be sticky, and, they tied for the league lead in yards per play allowed last year. I think they'll probably be among the league leaders there again, but I don't think they'll be quite as dominant. Anytime you're asking me to bet on a team who I think, rode their defense to 11 wins, and we saw it with, the Bears having outrageous season, with their defense or whatever, it can come back to earth in a hurry. So asking them to win 11 games, I think is a lot for the San Francisco 49ers. What do you think, Eric?
Yeah, it's the same thing as, it's not the same thing as the Bears last year, but it's similar in that, the 49ers don't need to decrease defensively all that much. They go from first or second to sixth or seventh or seventh or eighth. And now the margins are really thin for Jimmy Garoppolo in that offense. And there are some things about that offense that aren't particularly stable year to year. So they were something like 13th or 14th in success rate as a rushing offense, but they were 6th or 7th in terms of expected points on those rushes, meaning when they were successful, they were hitting big plays, but the big plays are not, necessarily stable season to season. So, another example of that would be, Jimmy G, I think, was at the top 5 in the NFL in terms of yards after the catch on 3rd and long. Now, they have some really good playmakers, and I think Brandon Ayuk helps them, but the margins are really thin for them. So as you said, if I need them to win 11 games, I'm going to pass or bet under, and I'm probably inclined at this price to bet under.
Yeah. Evan, 49ers, coming off of their Super Bowl season, what do you think?
10.5.
10.5.
It's a lot of wins, but I think that they're definitely going to regress, at least in some areas defensively. But I think that their offense has a lot of room for growth. Actually, that was what Jimmy Garoppolo's first full year as a healthy starter. Both of their tackles missed a bunch of time. Joe Staley and Mike McGlinchey. They replaced, Joe Staley, of course, retired. They replaced him with Trent Williams. Their number 2 receiver, Emmanuel Sanders, really, he didn't move the needle, I don't think, as much as the media tried to make it out to be last year. And I think that Ayuk can be a replacement right away for him. Deebo Samuel entering his second year. George Kittle played through an incredible amount of injuries last year. And I think that he can be better. He's a guy who I'm expecting some positive touchdown regression for this year. He was a touchdown machine. Every time he scored at Iowa, he's never had more than 5 touchdowns in a season in the NFL. I think that this is the year where we can see him score 7, 8, or 9. The offensive line, the offensive scheme, all returning with a ton of talent. I don't know. I mean, it's a lot of wins, but I think that if I was going to take it, I would not take the under on 10.5. I mean, I think that this is truly maybe the most from 1 to 53, maybe the most talented roster in the NFL.
Certainly a lot of depth. All right, let's get to some teams at the end here that Evan is passionate about their total. Let's start with the Denver Broncos. Evan, 7.5, minus 115 on the over. What do you think about what's going to happen with the Broncos this year?
Oh, you saw it at 7.5.
Yep.
Okay, see, I saw it at 8, and I was liking the under. I guess I should still like the under at 7.5.
I mean,
But
you might be able to find some eights out there. It was 7.5 minus
yeah,
115.
the Broncos faced the fourth easiest schedule of opposing defenses last year, and they performed a little bit above board offensively. This year, they face the fourth most difficult schedule of opposing teams based on projected Vegas win totals. Um, Drew Lock played relatively well, or at least they went 4-1 in his 5 starts, and you see a lot of Broncos fans clinging to that. This year or last year, they faced the Chargers, who underperformed defensively, the Texans, who a terrible defense. The Chiefs were not good defensively. The Lions were not good defensively, especially when Drew Lock faced them, and then the Raiders, who were terrible defensively. So those are the teams that Drew Lock went up against during his 5 starts. This is a team that changed a ton of has a ton of coaching staff turnover, especially on the offensive side. They fired Rich Scangarello. They fired their quarterbacks coach. Those are both Kyle Shanahan proteges, and they replaced them with most notably Pat Shermer, who I don't think is going to be ahead of the game, from a strategic standpoint. And like Drew Lock, they just have one of the most inexperienced skill position cores in the NFL. Noah Fant in his second year, KJ Hamler and Jerry Jeudy are rookies. Cortland Sutton in his third year, and all those young guys are going to have to learn the new offense under the new offensive coordinator, and he's not the most inspiring offensive coordinator either. And again, they face one of the toughest schedules in the league. So I actually like I think that what they're putting together, like I really like their draft. I think not like the highest grade. They also acquired Jarrell Casey, gave them like the highest grade in among all teams, but I just think that it's gonna take a year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I really like what the Broncos did this offseason a lot. They add Graham Glasgow, they add AJ Boye, they add Jarrell Casey, they bring in severe upgrades at weaponry behind Cortland Sutton. I think the defense will be better this year, especially with Vic Fangio in his second year with the Broncos. So I agree with you. I like what they're doing long term. I'm not sure it's all going to come together this year, but yeah, I don't know. I kind of like what the Broncos are doing. So I'm not going to be taking under here. I don't know if I'm going to take over, but I'm definitely not taking under here just because I like what they're doing. I like their personnel. Eric, what do you think about the Broncos?
See, I see them as sort of that, when we're looking for 2017 Jaguars, 2018 Bears, 2019 Bills, I think they might be the team just because the AFC is a little top heavy but weak. And I sort of disagree on Pat Shermer in a normal circumstance. When you look at his offenses, he kind of got a bad break in 2016 where he had to take over from Norv Turner. But in 2017, he had Case Keenum and the Vikings, relatively efficient. 2018, the Giants were 12th in yards per play, and last year they were 19th, despite all the limitations that they've had personnel wise, especially at the quarterback position. So I think he's a little bit more of an upgrade than people think. They did exactly what the Bills did in terms of giving Drew Lock weapons, and I agree with Evan that Drew Lock was not good down the stretch. But the record says 4-1, so people are all excited about him. I think this is a classic. Next year at this time, we're going to be talking to Broncos fans about how their 10-6 team wasn't even that good.
Yes, I dig it. Okay, let's go to another team in that division, Evan, the Las Vegas Raiders. On DraftKings, it's 7 over minus 125. I'm sure you can find some 7.5s out there if you shopped on Vegas. What do you see in there?
Yeah, so 7.5. Yeah, this is a team that just way overkicked, like in terms of win-loss. Just way outkicked what they should have. They had one of the worst point differentials last year. They were highly successful in one-score games. This year they faced the third toughest schedule based on sportsbook win total projections. They had the potential for quarterback controversy. The Raiders gave Marcus Mariota a pretty decent contract. Mike Mayock has liked him. Ever since he came out of Oregon, was his number 5 overall player, number 1 overall quarterback in that draft. they're leaning on a rookie in Henry Ruggs to be their number one receiver, and their defense is still nowhere near what they need it to be. They drafted a cornerback who runs almost 4.6 at number 19 overall. I think that this team is just they weren't good last year. They were bad last year, despite the fact that they finished 8-8 or 7-9 or whatever. And I don't think that they improved very much during the offseason.
Eric, thoughts on these fighting John Grudens?
Absolutely agree. I mean, there's tons of things. For one, they never won a game last year by more than a score, which we sort of know that is sort of going to regress season to season. They were more like a 4 or 5 win team than that. The Damon Arnett draft pick makes no sense to me. I like the Henry Ruggs pick, but he was going to be more of a complementary piece. And I think if he has a chance to be more like a Troy Williamson if he's asked to be the number one guy on a team. So I don't know. I don't like that draft pick necessarily for them. And then, as Evan said, they didn't do they signed a lot of players in free agency, but not very many of them were good. That coupled with, I don't know how good the home field advantage will be in Las Vegas, if there's one at all. I don't know. I'll probably even go under 6.5 for this team if I have to at some point.
Okay. Yeah. You can probably get under 7.5 right now. If you shop on DraftKings, I said under 7 is plus 104. And I like that too.
I'll take that. And like I said, I think that this team has a really good chance of being last place in the AFC West.
All right. The Falcons faithful are livid with Evan, who has been bashing the Falcons for most of the offseason throughout the draft process. Evan, just because I know you, I assume you're on the under Falcons. You can probably find 7.5. If you shop, it's extremely juiced on 7 on DraftKings. So I think it's 7.5 is probably the correct price.
Yeah. I mean, I like the under here. They also, I mean, you know how I feel about their offseason, and now they have the hardest schedule in the NFL based on win-loss projections. So easy under, I think.
Is there anything positive we can say about what the Falcons have done this offseason at all, Eric?
I think the A.J. Terrell draft pick was probably fine if you don't factor in the who is available. If you don't know that CeeDee Lamb and Jerry Jeudy are available, I like the draft pick. I like him as a player. I think he'll help their defense. I agree with Evan wholeheartedly, though, that being to win the NFC South, I don't really think defense is going to matter that much. I think they're going to have to outscore everybody, and them not enhancing the offense with a draft pick like that, is going to hurt them. I think long term, I like the Terrell pick. I have a hard time going under when the quarterback is as good as Matt Ryan, and the offensive line, I think, with the way learning curves work, 2 offensive linemen last year, I do think they'll be better there. And so I think their offense will be good. They could have made it great. And if they would have made it great, I think they could have competed in the NFC South. I'm going to lay off this one. I think my win projection is exactly 7.59. So, this is probably a no play. At 7, this is probably a no play for me. It's more like a true 7.5 anyway. Right. So it's probably a no play for me.
Right.
Well, I'll say this. So so the Falcons, they have the toughest schedule in the NFL this year, right? And Julio Jones is 31. And they're going to have to throw themselves out of holes. I mean, A.J. Terrell and Marlon Davidson, they're not going to move the needle on your defense. Your defense is still going to suck. You still can't rush the passer. You're relying on a bunch of rookies to turn your defense around in a year where they're going to be on limited practice and preparation due to the coronavirus. So you're going to have to throw yourself out of holes. What if something happens to Julio Jones? Your 3 receiver set becomes Calvin Ridley, Russell Gage, and Laquan Treadwell. Okay? Good luck, boy. Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that now defense doesn't matter as much as offense, but we've sort of seen that exact same thing happen to them defensively, right, over the last 2 years. With Keanu Neal goes down, Ricardo Allen goes down. Desmond Trufant goes down, Deion Jones, all those things have happened to the Falcons defensively and they have not been they have been fragile, right? And their defense has been terrible as a result. But you come back and say, okay, well, what if they get some regression in terms of luck on the defensive side of the ball? Charles Harris